On April 17, 2005, the state chapter in New Jersey celebrated its 5th class to be honored by the National Wrestling Hall of Fame with a Lifetime Service to Wrestling Award presented to Coach John M. Allen. Coach Allen began his lifetime commitment to wrestling some 50 years ago at St. Benedict's Prep School. Coach Allen coached 30 individual champions and 7 national prep champions, the foremost being Mike Caruso, who recorded an 81 wins to 0 loss high school record before earning 3 NCAA championships at Lehigh University. John is an exceptional individual. He has devoted his life in working with young people through athletics, teaching the skills and attitudes fundamental for success in sports, but more importantly, teaching his wrestlers how to win with humility and lose with grace and dignity. Coach Allen has always enjoyed the reputation of being a gentleman coach who brought credit to his profession, teams, schools, community, and family. And now, here is Coach Allen, who will instruct us on skills.
One that's common to many programs, the fish hook, back hook combination leads to the cheap tilt. So we're going to get a reach around wrist grip, we'll circle around the butt, get the fish hook, and then if the opponent is in position, he has his hip tilted into us a bit, we can reach over his back and get a back hook grip, an underhook grip on his arm, the same arm we had the fish hook grip on. And then we pry him over to his back by leaning backward ourselves, and then we prop him up using our instep under a leg to keep him propped up on his back and get some tilt points. Now, if the opponent offers strong resistance to being pried over to his back via the fish hook, back hook combination, we might deem the situation worthy of a far side diagonal flip under. So if he's resisting, what you might do is dive to the other side and bring him over into the cheap tilt position, prop him up with your foot, with the instep of that foot, and get the near fall points. It's pretty tough to get the pin. You could also, and even get more points and possibly a pin, more definitely get points and possibly a pin, is when you have the fish hook, back hook combination, if the opponent is resisting, you can take the back hook out and insert a half Nelson and put him over on his back. The half Nelson fish hook combination is a far more potent pin combo than the semi-stack or the tilt is. So one more time. All right, this time from a different angle. We've got the fish hook. We're going to procure the back hook. We're going to lean backward, bring them up onto his shoulders, use our foot, our instep, our free foot to prop him up, hook our instep under his leg. If he resists our leaning backward to bring him over into a cheap tilt, that's when we might consider a diagonal dive through to get him in that exact same finishing position. If the opportunity avails itself, we'd much prefer to forget about cheap tilting him and withdraw the back hook. For example, if he's leaning away from us and doesn't want to be pulled over onto his back, we might pull the back hook part out, still hold on to the fish hook, put a half Nelson in and dump him over to his back, get up on our toes, spread our feet, get chest on chest, be heavy on him, and pin him. It's a very potent pin combo, fish hook and half Nelson. Now another cheap tilt, this time we'll get it off a tight bar and reach around wrist grip. We've got reach around wrist grip. We've got a tight bar grip to go with it. And instead of stacking them up on the near side in a full stack up, which is oftentimes our aim, we'll circle to the opposite side, try to get a knee in front if possible, and bring them into a cheap tilt position. One more time. We've got a tight bar and a reach around wrist grip in combination with one another. And instead of stacking them up onto his near side into a full stack up position, what we'll do is circle to the other side as far around as we can to see if we can get a knee in front of his knee and tilt them up onto his shoulders as much as we can. A third cheek tilt, this time also from kneeling. We have a reach around wrist grip, and we have the crook of the near arm. Just a reach around wrist grip and a crook of the near arm. We don't have a tight bar inserted. And we put knee in front of knee and bring them to the near side for a cheek tilt. And again, use our free instep, not the posted foot, but the one that's free to be lifted in the air. And we use that to prop them up and keep them from rotating back. One more time. It's just simply a reach around wrist grip and a grab of the crook of the near arm, knee in front, stack them up onto his shoulders. Now that same move can be done in a fancy way, somewhat like that diagonal flip over. It can be done from standing, though. This one can be done from standing, and it's similar in appearance to that diagonal flip over, although we're already over on the other side. We circle a little bit to the front, toward the front. We get pretty much in a perpendicular position to the opponent. Keep our trail knee behind his knee. And what we're going to do is bring our head down into the groin area as much as we can, and at the same time take our forward foot and place the instep of it behind the far knee and bring him over to his back into a tilt position. One more time. We've got reach around wrist grip and crook up near arm, same as we had down kneeling on the mat. We come into a perpendicular position to opponent. We keep the trail knee behind his knee. We take our forward foot, we place it behind the place the instep of it behind the far knee, reach up with our foot, and swing our head down into the groin area and do a roll through and bring him into a cheek tilt position. Now we'll do a cheek tilt. To illustrate what that is, we've got a waist wrap and a far ankle grip. We've got low grip on the waist, low and tight and deep. We've got the far ankle, that is the far instep. And we are, instead of picking up on the ankle and trying to drive forward to break them down, we're going to circle all the way around to the far side, holding the ankle for as long as we can. And then we'll bring our forward knee in front of the opponent's knee, let go of the ankle, do a chop action on the near arm, and cheek tilt it. Now the worry of a cheek tilt, such as this is that the man will go with you, and he can then go after a headlock. It'll be staring him in the face. So cheek tilt can be punished by a headlock. One more time. We've got far ankle and waist. It's a deep, low, firm waist grip. We circle around to the far side, holding the ankle for as long as possible, tightening the grip on the waist as we go. It'll automatically tighten as we rotate to the other side. We let go of the ankle, do a chop on the near arm, and tilt him up onto his shoulders. But be concerned that if he goes with, he could go into the headlock grip. It would act as a counter to that move. We're going to show a group of cradles. We'll start with what's called arm trap side cradle. It's a side cradle where we trap the arm. And upon securing a side cradle on a kneeling opponent, if he slips or is allowed to slip his hand between bodies and over your back, you can simply drive laterally, sideways into him, and put him on his back and lean back, lay back on his arm and trap it. Or, if you had a side cradle on and he slips his arm through between bodies, reaches across your back, or you allow him to do that, then what you can also do is a cartwheel action to get into position to lay back on his arm. And sometimes driving laterally is not so easily accomplished, but the cartwheel probably would be easily accomplished. If he is not easy to drive laterally, he may have his hand posted out to the side, and so more of a forward diagonal movement, as occurs with the cartwheel, would be called for. All right, we're going to do called back cradle, Peterson cradle, and we're going to read some words that attach to this cradle and demonstrate how to get this in a couple of ways. Peterson back cradle pin grip is merely a sucker move. It's not a cure-all. That is, nobody should spend a vast portion of his competitive wrestling life looking to secure a Peterson pin grip, despite its acknowledged potency as a pin grip. Prime methods. If you, as the bottom man, are kneeling, an opponent while riding happens to be in a hover position, but without a grapevine, and he dangles his head down over your far side, you might reach up with your far side arm and collar his head, and then immediately reach back around and get his leg. Once both grips are secure, you proceed with far roll action and finish up by clasping your fingers to lock them up in a back cradle. The order of the head and leg procurements could be reversed. You could get the leg first and then the head. Another way to get Peterson cradle grip is if opponent provides you with his head and his leg, but then takes his head away, or if he provides you with his leg and refuses to provide his head at all, you might clamp the leg and do what we call wing it. That is, perform near roll type action. However, upon going to your shoulder to wing him, you don't do a full and proper step over, but rather do more of a high leg over, so that upon arrival on the other side of him, you can immediately collar his head and clasp hands to secure the back cradle. And one more time, Peterson cradle, the first way, you reach up and get the head that's across you, hovered across you, and then reach back and get the leg, and you do far roll action and clasp your fingers tightly and stay perpendicular to them so you can't put a grapevine in. The second method is if you can't get the head, or you have gotten the head and you've lost your grip on the head, but you do have the leg, you do near roll action and a high leg over type movement with your far leg, and immediately upon getting across to the other side, you reach for the head, clasp your fingers, and lock them up in a very potent pin grip. But we must always remember to stay perpendicular so that an opponent cannot get a grape and thereby nullify a good deal of your pinning force. We're going to do counter cradle, which is simply a side cradle versus a side cradle. One of the prime times for executing it would be as if you go to step up on your inside leg, trying to get up into a stand-up, and you do it poorly. That is, you didn't explode and get all the way up. You got stopped part way, or you stopped yourself part way. You're vulnerable to a side cradle. And if the opponent slaps it on and happens to make the mistake of stepping up on his forward foot, even if he doesn't, he's somewhat vulnerable. But if he steps up on his forward foot, he's all the more vulnerable to you reaching outward and around and getting his knee hot from the outside. That's going to help because as he rocks you backward, you can slip your instep under his far knee. That instep under the far knee is good leverage to have for what else is coming. Now you're going to post your other foot and at the same time go for his collar and his near knee to get the counter cradle grip. And you would then push off your posted foot to get up in the air and influence the referee's judgment and the opponent's mind to indicate that you're in control, that you hold sway with your cradle as opposed to his. One more time, if you step up on the inside leg attempting a stand-up and you fail to fully execute, you poorly execute, and the opponent releases with both his grips and slaps a cradle on, he comes around to a perpendicular position and starts to get ready to rock you backward to your back. If he happens to have made the critical mistake of stepping up on his foot, his forward foot, to get some push-off to rock you back, you extend your arm, reach around, grab his knee hot, and as he rocks you back, slip your instep under his far leg. Post your free leg, your other leg, go for collar, go for knee. Now you may have to lift his leg with your instep before reaching under from rear crotch. Sometimes his knee is not up in the air, and you have to use your own foot to lift his leg, reach in from rear crotch, lock up a cradle of your own, push off up into the opponent to indicate to him and the referee that your cradle holds sway over his. That way you can get reversal points and then near fall points, if not the fall itself. Until you establish control, you could only get a pin. Now we'll do it from another position, from another angle, facing away from the camera. We're going to be in a position where the opponent has a side cradle on. We're both kneeling. We haven't stepped up. And he's circling our butt, trying to get to the far side to apply a cradle, a layback cradle. We slip our instep inside, behind his leg, go with him, allow him to take us over, raise his near leg in the air with our foot, reach under from rear crotch to get the knee, get the collar with our other arm, push up into him to establish control. One more time. He has a side cradle. He's circling our butt to try to get to the far side to get us over on our back. We slip our instep in behind his leg, go with him, lift his near leg with our foot so we can get a hold of the leg for cradle purpose, get the collar, push off our posted foot, and get reversal and near fall points, perhaps even fall. Another cradle type is headless cradle. It's already been demonstrated other than on this Friday film, but we do it again on this Friday film. If an opponent has our leg up in the air and we have a whizzer grip in, if we can get into a position where we can reach behind his near leg with our hand and have our instep behind his far knee, the pressure forward behind both knees, and the pull backward by the overhook whizzer grip will sit him down, and we'll have what we term a headless cradle. His head is not included. We have, with our whizzer arm and our wrap under the leg from rear crotch, locked fingers to establish what we term a cradle. So you get in position where you can reach behind the knee, sit him back, and then you lock fingers immediately, and you have him in very strong control position. We're going to do what we term leg over cradles for an obvious reason. The leg will be extended across the opponent's body as we finish the cradle. And the first one we'll do is actually illegal in scholastic style wrestling in recent years, but I do believe it's still legal in freestyle wrestling. Now, it's a very potent, very forceful move. It's very dangerous to the person to whom you're doing it, so it has to be done from the right position. If your opponent is fully up and you are in a position where you're facing the same direction as he, it's far less dangerous to him if you apply the move correctly. And all it entails is you have a collar grip, you have a hand up on his neck or head area. You're going to take your other hand and post it so you can use your leg to place it behind his legs as a block, and then you just sit him backwards. And at that juncture, you can lock in a cradle, and your leg is across his body to some degree, and that's why we call it a leg over cradle. Another time when you can do leg over cradle, you'll be down on the mat. If you have a whizzer and you drill him down to his hip with drill action off that whizzer, or if he happens to fall to his hip while he's in on a single head in, and you didn't even drill him, you can now take your whizzer and post it on the far side of him for balance, so you don't lose your balance as you do a high leg over. And if you do that high leg over, you'll be able to apply the leg over cradle immediately. It's there for you to apply. Another time when you can apply leg over cradle is when you're being ridden. Top man happens to hook your leg. Face the other way. That's it. Top man hooks your leg, and you take your foot and go over his leg as a block. We call that a Hun School move. It's an old move that Hun School teams used to use many, many years ago. So you've overhooked his far foot, and now you get your knees off the mat so that your hips are high in the air, and you crowd it. You move laterally into him and do high leg over, and immediately secure a leg over cradle. So there'll be another time that you can get leg over cradle. And a fourth moment among the prime times for leg over cradle is if you're up against an opponent who's very tough to rotate toward his back. You've been working on the attempts to get him over to his back, and it just won't go. He clams up on the bottom, and you've got him prone, but he's just tough to rotate over, and you need points. You release at all points and turn and face the opposite direction and sit on his butt. You then reach down with your two hands, clasp his upper leg, and pull it up toward you, which puts pressure on his lower back. Now, if you pull up too hard or too far, it'll become illegal for sure. But if you just pull it up gradually and put the pressure there, the opponent can relieve that pressure by rotating off his stomach, but he then becomes immediately vulnerable to leg over cradle. So those are at least 4 moments when a leg over cradle could be applied to get an opponent over on his back and in bad trouble. We put a huge emphasis on reverse cradle over the years in teaching the wrestling to members of our program. And reverse cradle's great significance is twofold. Number one, it is very often there to be had, even versus the very best of opponents. And number two, it is very potent as a pin grip, even versus the very best of opponents. So in summary, there is much opportunity for reverse cradle, RC, and it is extremely potent. Executed well, it will pin anyone. Now from a referee's position, we'll demonstrate the position from which the RC gets locked on, generally speaking. RC, reverse cradle, is best applied from a near-facing position. You have to come around to the front if you're not already there and work from an angle. So if you're not there when the thought strikes, you've got to get there prior to applying the RC. You do not apply it from the rear, nor do you apply it from a perpendicular position in general. Okay? Now, any cradle requires discipline. You can't be too anxious. If the cradle is not there, you don't go for it. If it is there, don't be ashamed. Apply it in earnest. And we're going to show some of the prime times, some of the many times for potential application of RC. One time is if you shoot in on a single, and you take the leg up in the air and bring it up between your legs. You've gone in for a single, you've come up with the leg, and the other man happens to bow his head down. Anytime an opponent places his face near his knee, he is vulnerable to some sort of cradle. In this case, it would be RC, and we would just dump him down to his far shoulder and bring him to the mat. Not so hard as to go over. Another time, when you're in on a single head in, and a man falls back a little bit, but he doesn't spread his feet very much. His feet are in a narrow base. You can use neck strength off your single leg drop grip to dump him to the side. As he gets dumped, if he continues to rotate inward, as most will, he's vulnerable to what we call an ideal RC, where you have the bottom leg instead of the top leg. It can also be done off merry-go-round action, which leads to a cross heel pick. It's the natural follow-up to a cross heel pick. You circle, go down for the heel, pick it up, and right there, staring in the face, is an RC. It sometimes can be used via an arm drag if your opponent goes to his far hip and kind of folds his body as he gets dragged. Oftentimes, as they go down, they'll turn inward, and anytime they do, curled up fetal position place themselves, they are vulnerable to an RC. It can be done via a duck under from standing reverse headlock grip. If you have the standing reverse headlock and you sweep the man's arm in and he sweeps it out, you step in and do duck under action, en route to the mat, you can apply an RC. It's a natural follow-up to that duck under. It can be done down on the mat When you have a front headlock down on the mat, you can circle around to the side, get an angle on opponent, clasp his knee, not his hamstring, and dump him to his far shoulder. And once over, not before, then you lock your hands. You don't lock your hands right away before dumping because it facilitates the dump if you have his knee rather than the actual cradle. You can also do it versus a leg lift. If opponent has gone in for a single on you, has stood up with the leg, he has it between his legs, and you pop his head to the outside, take a front headlock grip, squat, get his knee, not the hamstring, lift him over, and instead of doing double grape, which is an option, apply RC. It can be done off a loose Turk. If you have a Turk grip on his leg, and the Turk grip happens to loosen, he slips his leg out part way, you can apply RC. Again, this is ideal RC because you have the bottom leg. That's the better leg to have. It's not the one you can always get, though. It can be done from riding at times. When you're the top man and you, let's say, have a leg hook and the opponent, you fight him in regard to his pivoting in, but eventually you allow him to pivot in. You just slow it down. He brings his knee up off the mat. His face comes near his knee. You can go to a cradle and do a roll through, a bridge through. You can take him over to his back with a south direction bridge through. You can also do it off leg hook. If he steps up on his outside foot, or steps up on both feet, backup style, and you take him back to Navy, and he happens to rotate inward. If he rotates inward, he makes himself vulnerable to an RC. So the point of the matter, without exhausting all the possible moments when you could apply an RC, there are many prime times, probably at least 24, and therefore RC, for the fact of it being available so often and so potent it is as a pin grip, because you've got weight on them, it's a tight grip on the other human body, it's a really potent move worth knowing. All right, we're about to show a series of completions of RC. Assuming we can actually get an RC, I'm going to show how to get the man over and pin him. Now, first of all, in this drill, we are in an overextended perpendicular position. And the reason why we start here is because in competition sometimes, a person will be on this position on top and not realize that RC is available. What you have to do is slide down off the man and see that his face is somewhat near his knee, and then you'll be able to lock a regular RC on, top leg RC. Now to get the man over on his back, number one, anytime you're pinning, if you don't have to get fancy, don't get fancy. So we would just try to ease him over onto his back and spread our knees and make sure that we're balanced and he can't unload us. If that's not feasible, because we just can't get his shoulders to roll over, then we would scroll down one leg and we would get it shoulder under shoulder and ease him over to his back. Once you get that shoulder under shoulder, you're able to lift his shoulder and ease him over to his back. Well, let's say that he resists that by the fact that his shoulder is so much down toward the mat that you can't get under it. Now we go to our hip, which we don't like to have to do, but we go to our hip and lift his foot up in the air with our foot. We raise his foot up so that we can get under that leg and do Turk action on his far leg, the bottom leg. And we apply Turk action. We hook his leg. And then we get him over to his back by picking up with our Turk leg, which rotates his body. We post our head for balance, and if we care to, we can flop off his head and figure four our own legs and get him in a kind of a RC stack position. If we're in a perpendicular position and have the RC on, and we can't get him over to his back, we weren't able to get shoulder under shoulder, we maybe weren't able to get foot under foot, we still want to get him over. What we might attempt is a high leg over action with our free leg. Each leg is free, actually. And then when he sits his head up a little bit, which often they do, the opponents do, then you tighten your grip on the throat and come back up and cover, and it's a much, much tighter grip than you had previously. And we call this high leg over neck vice. Another possibility is he's on his hip, and this is a devastating finish, and you're straddling his top leg. Either he worked his leg between your legs or you put yourself in the straddle position. You tilt your rear hip and do a little high leg over action. You get your foot or knee first, get your knee actually under his heel. And once under that heel, you walk all the way around to the front so you're actually parallel to him. Keep coming. Parallel to him, and he's again in somewhat of an RC stack type position, and you've got him definitely flat. It's a very devastating finger. He's on his knees. He's not on his hip. And we want to get him over on his back. The simplest way, of course, will be to dump him to his far shoulder. We just pick up on the knee area, dump him to his far shoulder, get him down at least off his base, and then do some of the things we just demonstrated. But let's say the opponent sits away, and he's going to try to counter our cradle. What we could do as he sits away is a bridge through. Now, we would actually do it as he's sitting through so as to make use of the momentum that he initiated, that he created. But we'll do it from a dead halt here and go into a high leg over, a high bridge through, and come up and cover the man. If the man sits away and we care not to go across our own back, we don't feel that that's something that's safely done, we're not confident in our bridging ability, then we do pancake action. We pancake them down toward the mat. We hold that grip in that position until we at least get near fall points, as many near fall points as we see. Then we go for the pin. We do a flip in the air and then come up and cover and go after the pin. Now it can happen that as you're working to complete an RC when the opponent is on his knees, he could attack single head out and lock on your leg. He could take a wrestler's lock on your leg, and once he has that grip, if you can't stretch your leg free, if you don't have the leg strength to break his grip, then what you have to learn in this sport is to change off. There are moments in life, in wrestling life, where you have to let go of what you have and go for whatever is next on the list of items that are possible and worthwhile. And in this case, you would unlock your RC, pick up on that near knee, and do Turk action on his far leg. And you'll get him on his back, you'll have control, you'll have a pinning situation, and you'll likely get near fall points as well as the control. We're going to repeat that series of completions from RC. And number one, we're going to slide back down and get the RC locked on, and you'll always want to remember to wrap it collar, not shoulder, and knee, not hamstring. That makes it a more efficient move in terms of enabling you to lock your fingers together. Now, if you don't need to be fancy, you just dump him over to his back and brace yourself so that he can't unload you. If his shoulder is down pretty low, you sprawl one leg down, get your shoulder under that shoulder, left to left in this case, and you lift his shoulder and rotate his upper body over so he's on his back. If his shoulder is so flush to the mat that you can't get your shoulder under shoulder, that's when you would go toward your hip and with your instep, lift the leg of his tied up leg, the one that you have locked up in your arms, and then Turk the bottom leg, the other leg, the free leg. And then again, ease him over to his back, picking up with your foot to rotate him toward his back. If his shoulder is not to be had, and you're not going to be able to lift his foot, you can't get under the shoulder, you can't get under the foot, then you might consider high leg over, neck vice. You do high leg over action, allow him a split second to pop his head up, as most will. When he does, strengthen your grip on the throat, and then come back up and cover him, and you'll have him flat and tight. If he's on his hip, and you care to, and you sense the opportunity to, you can straddle his leg if he hasn't placed his leg between yours. And we might want to rotate on this one such that the camera angle will be better. Keep rotating. And we get in a straddle position. And then we tilt our hip a little bit, do a little high leg over action, and work our knee under his heel. And once under, we keep circling, circling, circling until we get all the way around to a parallel position and have him in what amounts to an RC stack type position practically. If the opponent is on his knees and we have an RC on and he happens to sit away as we apply that RC, we can go right with it. We can just go right into a bridge through and then come up and cover. And we want to make sure we get in a bridge, that we don't roll across our back, because he could reach over our body and post a hand and stop our roll through. So it's got to be a bridge through, not a roll through. If we have that RC on and he sits through away in an attempt to counter move us, we can pancake him. We can bring him down to his back, pancake style, and hold him there, freeze him until we get near 4 points, and then do a flip, and then come up and cover the opponent to get the pin. And then finally, if we have RC grip on and we're not alert, and we allow an opponent to get a hold of our leg, particularly if he locks on it, we can't stretch our leg free. We don't want him to have that leg. In this sport, to the extent you keep your legs free and your wrists free, it is to that extent you will enjoy success in the sport. But if he gets the leg, despite our wish that he wouldn't, then what we have to do is learn to discipline ourselves to release what we have and go to our next move, which in this case is a Turk. And we just step up in there and get a loose Turk on the man. As tight a Turk as we can get, but it will probably be fairly loose because of him having our leg. To speak of the great potency of reverse cradle, RC, is not to negate the terrific potential of any cradle. And we're now going to work on side cradles, both with and without the cross face grip. We have a rule with regard to cradles. If the man that's on the bottom happens to have his rump higher than his head, for example, if he does a bear type stand up, we would not apply a side cradle. It would be RC time. We'd come to the front, lock the cradle on, lift the mass over tea kettle, and then pin. If, on the other hand, he doesn't do a bear type stand up where he walks backward on his hands, getting his knees off the mat, getting his face near his knees. If he steps up inside leg or outside leg, for example, inside leg here, now his head is higher than his rump. So we would not attempt an RC. It would put us off balance. Instead, we do a basic side cradle. Once the cradle has been applied, we wrap it collar and knee, not shoulder and hamstring, collar and knee, to be efficient, to be able to lock your hands. We would put a knee behind a heel, squish our feet to the outside so we don't injure ourselves as we rock him back slowly to his back. And then once he's on his back, we don't get fancy. If he's flat, he's flat. We would cover a leg, try to scissor that leg to keep him from kicking, put our forehead against his temple, and squeeze a little bit and get the pin. Now, if on the other hand, his leg is free and he's rotating away from us, we can't get him over to his back with what we have, that is the signal that we would put our bottom knee against his lower ribs, push with the knee, pull with the arms, and rotate his upper body so that he is on his back. And we would just stay with that sort of grip, temple against forehead. If the opponent happens to step up not on the inside leg, but on the outside leg, then if he doesn't get all the way up in one explosive movement, which is what he should do, if he's well trained and if he's following the good training he's been given, he should explode completely into a stand-up, not stop part way up, not be allowed to stop part way up, or not to allow it. We would shift our body up onto him. We'd move up onto him so that we can wrap at collar and knee rather than hamstring and shoulder. And then we would roll through the opening between his feet so that we don't roll down one of his legs and tear up a knee or an ankle. And we have him on his back. So the basic rule is if his rump is higher than his head, we apply an RC. If his head is higher than his rump, then we would apply some sort of inside or outside basic side cradle. Now we're going to apply a tight side cradle. Cradle has a cross face involved. We're going to take far ankle grip and cross face grip. We've got a cross face, we've got far ankle. Now we would not attempt to apply the cradle grip from here. We don't do cradles from a perpendicular position. Reason being, it's too easy for an opponent to reach in with his free arm and grab a hold of our leg. And then he somewhat controls us, or at least restricts us. Instead, we would circle around his rump, around his butt, release on the ankle, reach under from rear crotch and grab our own wrist. We would not let go of the cross face. The cross face is maintained. And then one simple way to get him to his back would be to do a rollover. We just roll him across our body. We still have the cross face. We have our own wrist. And then we would try to scissor that far leg, and we'd have a very, very tight side cradle. Another possibility is if the opponent is prone on his stomach. We've got him prone, and we've got what we term an inverted crab ride. We've got our insteps inside his knees, and we've got our hands inside his arms, and we push outward with our feet and outward with our hands, and it keeps him prone momentarily until we get a better thought. And the better thought would be to take one hand out, put it behind his elbow, take the other hand out, apply a cross face, and then get... Now once we have the cross face in, it's time to get off his legs, sit through toward the front. Our other hand goes back in the rear crotch area, and then using a little bit of leg drive and a little bit of arm strength, we lift them up into a sitting position. Once up in a sitting position, we can, from rear crotch, reach in with our free hand and grab our own wrist, and then just rock them backward over our knee and get them in cross-face cradle, tight side cradle, and we'd scissor that far leg. Now, if ever you're losing a cradle, whether it's a tight side cradle, cross-face cradle, or whether it's just a simple side cradle, you might look to get fish hook grip. One of those arms is likely to be within reach, and you'd reach in and get a fish hook. If you can't get one, get the other. And then you have another series of movements that you can go to that'll put the man back over on his back. Now, if you're going for a cross-face cradle against a prone opponent, and he tilts his body to what we'll call the other hip momentarily, then you can't stay within a cradle attempt. It's not to be, and you'll injure him in the effort. If he turns in toward you, he goes to his outside hip, and you were to continue to try to force him into a sitting position, you'd break his back. His back would have to fold, and backs aren't meant to fold in that direction. So what you would do is change off to something else. You come to your base, to your knees, reach under and grab his upper arm, the one you've got the cross face on, with your second hand. Give a little tug to get him onto his hip. And this is what we call compound cross face. And now you circle his head, arc around his head, let go with that second hand that reached in, and use it as a brace for balance. And then you can get up on your toes, spread your feet, get chest on chest, and you'll be able to apply a lot of pressure to his body to keep him on his back and maybe get him flat. That's also called twisted. Some people call that twisted. We call compound cross face. All right, continuing on side cradle, it's worth mentioning, I think, that there are times and places when and where side cradle is not a wise choice. For example, if an opponent is in a sit-out and you're directly behind him, you don't want to reach over his back and apply a cradle, because he could too easily apply what we call a craw action, go to his shoulder and come out the side door and then go in behind you. So if he were in a sit-out and we wanted a cradle, we would come perpendicular if we would apply a cradle at all, but certainly not from the rear. Another time is if you're in a perpendicular hover position with the opponent on his knees. To apply a cradle from this perpendicular position invites him with his free arm, you may have both of them free actually, invites him to reach in and grab a leg. And in this sport, we want to keep our legs free. From another angle, if we're in a perpendicular hover position and we start looking for a far side cradle, it makes us all too vulnerable to an opponent pivoting in slightly and reaching in and grabbing our leg. If he gets a hold of our leg, it makes it tough for us to complete the cradle and may lead to ourselves getting reversed even to our back. So we want to keep our leg free in this sport. We wouldn't apply a cradle when we're super tired and/or inept. If you're not good at cradles, you shouldn't be applying them unless you're desperate. And certainly if you're real tired, you can get yourself in trouble if you don't know how to finish a cradle or keep the opponent from getting you. Always you have to be concerned when applying a side cradle where there's no cross face locked on. You have to be concerned with counter cradle. So if you have a cradle on and you happen to be circling his butt and he brings his instep under your knee and then lets you rock him back, he could apply perhaps a counter cradle to your cradle and you'd wish that you had not gone for the cradle. Again, you've got to keep your leg and legs free. If you have a side cradle on and your intent is to do a rollover with it, just both men kneeling, put a side cradle on, and you have the intent of doing a rollover, you have to have it on tight, because if the opponent could work his arm between bodies and stick his hand down at the post and trap you on your back, you'd be in jeopardy. Now, if ever caught there, you don't want to panic. If he removes his post, you continue the rollover. If he takes his hand off the mat, then you bring him over. Sometimes they get anxious to trap you on your back and go for the pin. They haven't even broken out of the cradle. You can finish the cradle. If, on the other hand, he's strong with his post, he keeps it out there, then you would release your cradle, dive your hand under his armpit, grab his body trunk, and thrust him forward as you move your own body to the rear and get out of that bad position that you were in. All right, with plenty covered on cradles, we're going to move to double bar pry. Now, we've already, I believe, on film spoken of tight bar and the series of moves from tight bar, among which is double bar pry. If our opponent happens to be prone and we have somehow secured a tight bar on the near arm, and we'd like to get him over to his back, and we'd like to do it double bar pry style, sometimes that free arm of the opponent is simply easy to sweep back. You just reach, grab the crook of his arm, sweep it back, lock your fingers together, and then to get him on his back, you come forward and then around his head into a straddle position. And that's the position in which we try to get the pin. If in the attempt to come forward and go around, his head keeps seemingly sliding away from us, we can't get around to the front, then and only then would we tend to contemplate applying a figure four in the head, where we'd step up with our foot and insert our heel as if it were a hand going onto the head for half Nelson, but this heel would ultimately enable us to get a figure four in the head. Now, a second way of getting the tight bar doubled, the double tight bar grip, instead of sweeping that near arm back, if you have a tight bar on one arm and a one-on-one, so-called wrist bar on the other, then what you can do is jump across to the side of the one-on-one, pull his wrist down alongside his hip, take your head and press it against his upper arm, release your wrist grip, but still continue to press with that forearm and wrist of your own against his lower arm to keep his arm straight alongside him until you can roll your hand over top his arm and secure your double bar. Now, it can happen that the opponent, not wanting to go to his back at any time, resists your prying him over to his back. And he can do it by tilting his hip into you. If he does so, you jump to the other side and start to run the tight bar, the double bar from that side. If he tilts that hip into you, then you have to jump back to the other side. Eventually, you've got to get enough quickness to get him in position that you can rotate him to his back and pin. All right, we're going to secure a fish hook and do our little fish hook series, pin series, and then mention some alternatives off the fish hook on the other arm. If we're on top and we sweep the near arm across in a diagonal fashion and get what we call reach around wrist grip with our right hand, what was formerly the waist strap hand, and we circle to that other side, we can reach in from rear crotch and get the fish hook, the ball and chain grip. And then from here, we would apply a simple half Nelson. That's the primary thought, primary objective, because with the fish hook grip and with the half Nelson, we could ease him over onto his back very readily and put chest on chest and pin. If he refuses to go over to his back, it will probably be signaled by the fact that he's tilting his hip into us a little bit. So rather than try to apply a half that's not going to be anything other than futile, we release the half, reach across his back, and get a back hook grip to go with our fish hook grip, and then just sit back, rock back, and get our foot in a position where we can keep him in a rotated position. On the other hand, we're always looking for that half Nelson. So if somehow he were to rise back to base against that cheap tilt, we would look for the half Nelson again. We put a double emphasis on the half Nelson. Cheap tilt gets near 4 points. Half Nelson pins and has pinned more people in the history of the sport than any other grip. As the Methuselah of wrestling, I have lived enough relative to this wrestling scene to make that claim. Now with the fish hook, if we get a back hook and the opponent is resisting our bringing him over into a cheap tilt, we might get fancy and do a dive over, flip through, and rotate him into that cheap tilt pin grip position. Now that's the fish hook series. If we happen to have a fish hook on the other arm, as sometimes can happen in the course of wrestling, you get a fish hook but not on the one arm but on the other. We have it on the near arm. Here what we would go for is forearm or cross face, depending on what you care to call it. And with each hand now, we do an arc type motion to dump the opponent onto his back, get chest on chest, up on our toes, feet well spread, hold the fish hook, hold the forearm cross face grip, and put enough pressure on him to pin him. One more time. This time we'll set it up. Normally you could push his head down and roll him up onto his shoulders to get him in what's called a stack position. But stack up has become a potentially dangerous move because kids have been badly hurt while caught up in a tuck position. So what you might do is use that as a setup. You press down on the man's head. When his head comes up, you go under his face and get the forearm or cross face, and then pull in on the arm, pull in on the wrist, and move those hands of your own into an arc position, put him over on his back, and put him away. All right, there are moments in competition where you get what we call an ideal crotch grip. That is, you have your hand inside crotch relative to opponent. He's down on his hip. So we have the opponent on his hip, and we have the inside crotch grip. Gotta stop.
Okay, inside crotch. Go.
All right, so we have the inside crotch grip, and we want to get the opponent over on his back. The simplest, most effective way, and the thing we most see, could be a half Nelson. You try to get a hand inside and up over his head. If you get the half Nelson, put him on his back. Can't get that because the man's turning away. If you can get inside and get a one-on-one on the near wrist, you can pull that wrist out and up perpendicular to his body axis and shoot the half. If you can't get either of those, it'll probably be because he has his elbow pretty close to his ribs, and he won't let you get behind his arm to get the half or the one-on-one that would lead to the half. And that's when you would apply a false half. You go after the half with no insertion behind the arm and bend him into an ideal RC. If none of those are to be had, then a final thought, perhaps, there are other possibilities perhaps, but a final thought in this series is we take the forearm of the arm that has the inside crotch grip and apply it that is pressured against the opponent's thigh. And as we jump around his legs, we press down and hurt him a little bit, which makes him vulnerable to a Navy grip. And then we would do our Navy lift series. Now the Navy lift series that we apply is fourfold. Number one, we raise that leg up, get our own elbow up to the ceiling a little bit until we can insert, that is, snake in a reverse Nelson. We try to insert a reverse Nelson and pounce on him, close the opening so he can't get out. If he is rotating in toward us, hand in the air, then we would insert a half Nelson, pounce on him, close the opening so he can't slip a hand through and get out. If he's turning in toward us and his hand is close to body, we apply a false half Nelson from that side that we're on and get a ideal RC. We'd apply the RC. If he has rotated in, hand close to body, and now reaches up across our back to try to prevent us from getting his face near his knee so that we can apply the ideal RC, then we would put an overhook whizzer-type grip on his arm and stick one leg across to the other side of his head, which traps him on his back, and we get what's called inverted reverse headlock. And we scroll one leg back, get parallel to him, and effectively pin him. And power forward. We're going to put our Nelsons group, our various Nelsons, together in demonstration here. The first one we'll do is bar Nelson. We're going to do it from a 3/4 stretcher position. We have a grape in on this near side. We have our free instep inside the opponent's lower leg near his foot, ankle. We're going to press out with that foot while at the same time stretching the grape and turning toward the opponent's head so that we're either parallel or almost coinciding with him. We're going to pop his arms out to the front to lower him down into a prone position. Once we have him down, we're going to apply the bar Nelson. Now the bar Nelson is simply this. You rest your forearm on his lower head near the neck, upper neck area, lower head. Turn palm up. With your other hand, you reach under his arm near the elbow area for better leverage. You lock fingers, pry his elbow up in the air so that you can then apply a half Nelson. The purpose of bar Nelson is to enable or allow, facilitate the application of a half Nelson. In this case, with this half Nelson, we would still press out with our free foot and we would gradually ease him over toward his back and try to get at least near fall points. That might be all we'd be able to get with this particular half Nelson grip. So that's bar Nelson. You rest. We're going to do a false half Nelson application against the whizzer grip as a counter to the whizzer grip, the overhook grip that the opponent has. We would come a little bit perpendicular, go up over his head, half Nelson style, but because we're not behind the near arm, we don't have a standard half Nelson. We have what we call a false half Nelson. And then you bring your hand under your own chest and swing them around in front of you. You trap your hand between his chest and yours, and it becomes a very tight grip, this false half Nelson counter to whizzer. For other Nelsons now, we're going to put half Nelson and reverse Nelson somewhat together. We're going to execute a far roll action, off which we're going to apply a reverse Nelson, which is the standard follow-up. So we roll them, hip hoist, and apply a reverse Nelson. A reverse Nelson is what you now see. If the opponent rotates in toward us, hand in the air, we change to a half Nelson. If he rotates away from us, hand in the air, we change to a reverse Nelson, get our head up, let our hips sag so we don't go over him. If he rotates back in, we apply the half Nelson again. So half Nelson and reverse Nelson are complements to one another. Now we're going to apply a leg half. If the opponent is down prone, perhaps late in the bout, reaches back to grab our wrist, figuring wrist control will prevent us from putting him on his back. What we can do is bring his hand out and up, even though he has our wrist, and apply a leg half with our heel. And then, though we could figure for the head and have done so on film, we this time will break the grip that he had on our wrist and apply a half Nelson, step off with our leg, and just finish him off with that half Nelson. And now some other Nelsons. We'll do a quarter Nelson, standard quarter Nelson. Opponent's in on a single head in. And we've got hand on head. We've got an overhook. We grab our own wrist. We push his head down and through to the outside, circle his head, arc around his head, and we'll get a reverse Nelson crotch. Or we could apply what's called a power quarter Nelson. This time we grab chin. Instead of putting hand on head, we grab chin. And instead of grabbing our own wrist, we grab our own forearm. And it's a freestyle move. It's a much more powerful Nelson, quarter Nelson. And we turn him over to his back. We crank him over and maintain that grip. And then three-quarter Nelson. A three-quarter Nelson we'll do off a leg hook. That's what it's done off of. So we have a leg hook grip on our opponent. And his head happens to be down enough that we sense that we could rest the forearm up on his neck, palm up, reach under from the near side, under his chest, and lock fingers. And although it is illegal to bring his head down under his body, it is legal to bring it down under ours. So we bring it down toward our right knee, and we start circling the leg hook until we get him in a tuck position. Now, it's a dangerous position for the opponent, so we have to be careful how well we do it so we don't injure him. The counter, or block actually, to three-quarter Nelson is for the opponent to lunge out to the front when we've got the three-quarter on. Actually, he should lunge before we get the three-quarter grip on. But if we have the three-quarter grip and he lunges to the front, then we can change to what we term Gazzone three-quarter. A Gazzone three-quarter is similar to Gazzone RC completion. We do a little high leg over, get under his near leg, and then proceed toward the front, staying under that leg. We have to come all the way around to a parallel position and have him in a tuck pose where he's trapped on his back. One more time with Gazzone three-quarter. We go for a three-quarter off a leg hook. We have the three-quarter grip, but the opponent's well-trained. He lunges out, gets his head up a little bit, but isn't able to break our grip. Now what we do is we change off to another completion. We do a high leg over, get under his leg, stay under it, and keep walking all the way around to the front until we get him in a full tuck, whereby we're parallel to him and have him on his back flat. All right, we're going to do a snapback pin series against sit-out. Some of the ways in which you can get a man on his back when he's in sit-out. Number one, when a man sits out, we want to be underneath, behind both arms. So he can't do a quick turn in and face us and get a neutral. So we're underneath, behind both arms. And from here, if the opponent happens to reach up and grab our head, which is over his shoulder, and he might just do that, that's the signal, if he does do that, reach up to grab our head, that is the signal to crawl backward and snap him down flat. Now that's not a pin grip, it's a lead up to a pin grip. Now once he's to his back, he doesn't want to stay there. He can't rotate in toward the side where our head's on, our head's in the way, so he's got to rotate the opposite way, and as he does, we do duck under type action, circle, we see the half Nelson staring us in the face. We lift the top knee and get inside crotch and get him on his back. So snap back against an attempted head grab can lead to half Nelson crotch if well executed by the opponent, by the person executing. Now, if the man's in sit out and he doesn't reach for our head, but we want to snap him, we just crawl backward, snap him down flat with the double underhook. If he's smart, he'll rotate off his back with his hand close to his chest. As he does that, we slow him down, even stop him when he gets to his hip by using elbow, forearm, pressure into his back. And then we take our other hand out from the underhook position, press his head downward to get it out of our way as we go around his head. And then we're going to lift his fingers so that we can release on those fingers and insert an underhook and get standard two upper arms tie-up. We've got an underhook on the top arm. We've got an over grip on the bottom tricep. That's the standard two upper arms tie-up. A third method for getting him on his back via a snapback is this. We can now, if we care to, we could have on some of the others, at least the latter one, the one we just did previously, we could drive up into him, drive forward, press forward, to get him, to stimulate him, to resist and lean backward. When he does that, we release the far underhook, grab chin, snap him down flat. Arrest his motion, hold him with that grip until he slows down his movement, maybe even stops, and then come over the top of the arm and or the head. It's arm then head or head then arm, and get inverted reverse headlock, which is a devastating pin grip. And number 4 movement, if the man, when we find him reaching up to grab our head and we snap him back, if we snap him and he rotates and he's strong enough and smart enough to rotate to his base, we circle to a perpendicular position and we look for double trouble and lock our fingers under that far armpit. Once we get the double trouble grip, we swing him around to the front and put him on his back. Number 5 in this series, if we have a double underhook and he hasn't reached for our head, as he did earlier, and we snap him down flat, and again, he's smart, he rotates, hand close to body, he's strong, he rotates to his base. We press downward with our elbow and forearm again, and keep his head down until we can circle to a perpendicular position whereby, or at which point, we can lift the near knee and apply a Turk action on his free leg, on his lower leg. And number 6, we're going to demonstrate and illustrate some of the stack-ups that are possible in this sport. Not all of them will we demonstrate now. Some others are within the films that we've already taken. Stack-up is sort of a sucker move. If an opponent happens to bow his head while you're out there wrestling him, he may be vulnerable to a stack-up. You may be able to put him in a tuck pose. If he attempts a Granby roll, you may be able, through controlled resistance, stack him up. If he happens to allow you to gain control of his arm and or wrist while he's attempting a spread eagle, you may be able to execute a counter move that will put him in a stacked position, which we'll put on film in a moment. It should be realized that stack up can have its place, but it is not a cure-all, and better moves are available for most situations where stack-up avails itself. Thus, in most cases, it is unwise to give stack-up more than a minimal consideration. Do not waste time on the less helpful, least likely to succeed movements of the sport. Get to thinking and doing better. Now, the first stack-up we'll demonstrate is already on this very film a little bit earlier, but we'll do it again. If you have a near fish hook, and care not to go under his face and get the forearm because his head is down and he blocks you from doing that, and you haven't thought the thought of pressing down in his head so his head would come up and you could get that cross face or forearm. If instead you just want to roll him up on his shoulders into a stack position, that's one method of getting a stack up. Or if he's prone on his stomach and you have a near one-on-one, what you can do is get an inverted Navy grip. Normally he's on his back in a supine position when you get a Navy grip. Here he's in a prone position on his stomach. You get a Navy grip, you do Navy lift action, and then you thrust your hand of that Navy grip, that lace right grip, up on his ribs and rotate him up into a stack tight position. You hoist him up into a stacked position, trying to get his butt up in the air as much as possible. A third method of getting a stack up would be from what we call reach around wrist grip and a near tight bar. A bevel bar, stack up. You get the reach around wrist grip, you get the near tight bar, you take your trail knee, the one further to the rear, and put it in front of his knee and roll him up on his shoulders. And that's a stack up position. And tight as that grip is, you might just be able to pin him with that grip. That's a fairly potent stack up. The previous two are a lot less likely to be procured, and they're both very dangerous, and this one is not as dangerous. And a fourth stack up, full stack up, as opposed to semi-stack up or cheap tilt type move. If the opponent has a grapevine on us, and he is looking to get a spread eagle, this is a counter move that isn't workable by all, and it isn't workable by any against all, but some people that are bottom men have the ability to execute this, and it has worked in competition for a pin. What you do is you reach back and hook his arm, trying to get a hold of the wrist, and then you do a slight low, not very far to the side, high leg over action, and you put the opponent in a tuck position. And that stack position will trap him on his back. So coming back and trying it one more time from a slightly different angle. The opponent...
Oh.
All right, from this new angle, the opponent again has the grapevine. He's got the spread eagle grip. He's attempting. We reach back and hook the arm from outside, grabbing the wrist if we can get it. We're going to go down toward our shoulder, and as we go to our shoulder, we bring high leg over with the tied foot, and then plant our foot firmly on the mat, sole down, and the opponent gets trapped in a sucker move, really. He's been trapped in a stacked position, unaware that that's what was coming. It's a very uncommon counter to leg grape and spread eagle attempt, but it is workable by some against some. We're going to show a variation, a variety, I should say, of tight bar completions. Let's say we have a tight bar on the prone opponent, and we have a far one-on-one, a wrist bar on that opponent. We would pull that wrist and arm, that further arm, in under his chest so it doesn't resist us, hinder us as we go around into a straddling position. So we pull that under him, we drive forward to the front, and then arc around his head a bit until we can get into a straddle position, keeping his elbow tight. We don't want his elbow to slip through. It's very important that the tight bar remain tight on that particular completion. So one more time, we have a tight bar and we have a wrist bar, and we come forward to the front as we pull that wrist bar and further arm under him, and we get into a straddle position, put weight on. The second one is if we're having trouble coming to the front, getting under his arm to rotate him to his back, what we can do is release the tight bar, slide our hand down onto his wrist, put his wrist on our hip, and do what we call bucky action or hip under arm pry. We've got our hip now under his arm, and again we run to the front while pulling in on that further arm, and we get into a position where we can drop our bottom knee on the other side of his head, and we change to an underhook from that one-on-one grip we had. We change to an underhook, and then we sit through. We maintain an underhook grip, and the other wrist is still up on our hip, and we've got him in a bad semi-tuck position where he's hurting buckaroo. One more time from a different angle. We have the tight bar and the wrist bar, the one-on-one. We'd like to pry him over to his back, but he's resistant to the pry over action. We can't get forward enough to dump him over. So we release the tight bar, slide our hand down, get a wrist, put his wrist on our hip, run to the front until we can drop our bottom knee on the other side of his head. As we do that, that's the signal to release on the wrist and underhook that other arm, keeping that first wrist we had, the one on our hip actually was the second wrist, keeping that wrist that we have on our hip. And now we sit through and get our head under his back a little bit and pressure his shoulders down if we possibly can. Okay? The third move off tight bar, possibly illegal, probably illegal, is an arm angle finish. What we're going to, if no attempt is made to actually do harm, but more to press the opponent into submitting, or if you're in freestyle and it'd be legal almost no matter what you did, although you would still not intend to break the man's arm or harm his arm in any great way. If the opponent is in a tight bar and you care to do this arm angle finish, he has to reach up and press against your hip area to try to keep you from coming to the front. As he does that, you start coming to the front with force anyway. You let his elbow slip through. You don't keep the arm so tight. You let his elbow pop through. You put your hand on his lat muscle and continue circling to the other side, releasing on that one-on-one you had on the other side. And now hidden under your body and his is that lat grip. That grip on his lat, and his arm is kind of twisted, mangled a bit underneath you, and it's very tough for him to resist allowing the pin. So that's arm angle finish. A fourth finish occurs, or in this series occurs, when the bottom man, prone as he is, blocks off your attempt to get on one-on-one by bringing his elbow close to his ribs. That happening, what you'll do is trap his arm against his ribs by taking your hand and putting outside-in pressure against his arm so that it's where he wants it to be at this point in time, but which is actually going to entrap him. You start forward to the front with your tight bar as before, continue circling until you get in a straddle position, but not having the one-on-one. You have to do something else, and that something else will be you get inverted reverse headlock. And there's almost no better pin than inverted reverse headlock. One more time from a slightly different angle. If you have a tight bar and the bottom man puts his elbow close to his ribs, which is smart in a sense, he's preventing a one-on-one, he's preventing you from getting wrist control. You trap his arm against his ribs by pressuring from outside in with your hand. You start forward with the tight bar, circle until you get to a straddle position, and then take inverted reverse headlock and finish with inverted reverse headlock. A fifth item would be to execute the double bar pry. You could have the tight bar and reach up across. We'll do it in the simplest way possible now. Reach up across and sweep his arm back and get double bar pry grip. And then you could circle to the front and straddle the head, or from this position, move toward the front and do a figure four action on the head. Both of which have been demonstrated on this film on which this particular series is being shown, so we won't redo them. So you've got double bar pry as a possible finish to tight bar as a start, as a lead up. Another one will be brutal far half. You have a tight bar, and somehow you're able to effectively, from the side you're on, reach across them and get a half Nelson on the other side. You begin to pry him over. You will not be able to pin him. You will be able to hurt him some, and if you hurt him enough, he'll yell. The ref will jump in and protect him, as he should, from something that is potentially dangerous. So you try to ease him over slowly and gradually and without so much force that you cause a yelp, and try to get near fall points. One more time, we'll rotate him toward his back into the near fall position. That's what we call brutal far half. It is very tight and it is brutal and that it's painful. Now, if you want a half Nelson to go with your tight bar, you get a one-on-one on the far side. You leap to the other side, pull his wrist out and up so that his arm is perpendicular to his body axis. Stick your knee under that arm so that you can release on the wrist and apply a half Nelson, or perhaps better yet, a simple underhook. Just as effective, probably easier to get. And you come toward the front into a straddle position to put him on his back in a position where he is going to perhaps get pinned. Certainly your 4 points will occur. One more time with a half Nelson via a jump across. We've got a tight bar on the near side. We've got a one-on-one wrist bar on the far side. We leap to the other side, pull his wrist out and up, stick a knee under his arm so we can release on the wrist and secure either a half Nelson or an underhook. Whichever, we come more to the front and get in a straddle position and try to be patient until the referee calls a pin. Certainly he'll offer us near 4 points. All right, another tight bar series is what we call Belbel bar series. We get a reach around wrist grip. We sink a tight bar to go with that reach around wrist grip. And number one movement would be to stack them up. We put knee in front, roll him up onto his shoulders. Now he could possibly flip through, and we would do cartwheel action. And if he ends up on his stomach, if he turns to his stomach to avoid being rotated on his back, we would release the reach around wrist grip and go for a far one-on-one. Once we get that far one-on-one,